Welcome to everyone. Welcome to Canadian Centennial Choir members. Welcome to any visitors to our program. And a very warm welcome to Jeff Enns, choral composer, choral singer, and much more. I'm really just going to hand it over to Jenna, who has done all the background work and discussions with Jeff. And enjoy yourselves, and there'll be a Q&A session at about 8 o'clock or so. So Jenna and Jeff.
Thanks, Marg. Oh, I see we're spotlighting already. It's always so wonderful not to see yourself, right, Jeff? So first, thanks, Marg, and welcome to everyone to this composer session. We're so grateful that Jeff Enns has joined us, and I just wanted to let people know how this session will run. Jeff will be answering a series of questions, challenging him throughout the evening to talk about his composition style and his life and career. And interspersed amongst those discussions, we'll be hearing some of his fantastic works. And so we'll be jumping back and forth between YouTube showings and speaking. But you can just sit back and relax and enjoy. Our tech team will take care of all of that. And if you do know how to use the chat function, feel free to comment and leave questions there. And at the end, we will also open to live questions. So you can either leave a question in the chat if you don't want to ask it yourself, or you can save your question to the end and raise your hand. Hopefully most people know how to use that function. We've been practicing it, rehearsing it. But if you don't, feel free to leave something in the chat and we'll figure out how to get to you. So, Jeff Enns, I think the best way to introduce you is to have you introduce yourself. So I would love it if you could give us a bit of background about who you are and how you've got to where you are today, and maybe a little bit about what you would have been doing in regular times were it not for the pandemic.
You're gonna have to prompt me on each of those questions because my memory's, feeling like it's shallower every day.
No
Um,
problem.
I was born and raised in Waterloo, and I moved all the way to Elmira, which is about 20-minute drive, not even, um, 24 years ago. So I grew up in a fairly musical home. Well, very musical home. My mom was a piano teacher, and up until recently, also church organist. My grandfather directed the church choir for 47 years, and I was born on a Thursday night at 7:30, just in time for a church choir. So if I tell you what month I was born in, that the story doesn't have quite as much legs. July there wasn't choir, but it's still better that way. Um, I've been singing since before I could talk, I think. I remember playing Lego underneath the piano at church when my mom was accompanying the choir. And one of my first memories is of the installing the pipe organ in my church. Once the old one had gone out to pasture, we got a Gabriel Ney tracker in 1974, I believe. And I remember them putting the pipes up, and I don't know why I was sitting there in the sanctuary watching these guys work, but I always thought that would be a really neat thing to do, and I loved the organ. And I did actually work in the organ business for about 25 years on and off. Um, I My first instrument was violin, and I took lessons starting when I was about 6, and then I picked up cello along the way. And when I got to high school, our bass player um, quit school, and so I thought, well, hey, that how hard could that be? So I figured double bass, and then I played in youth orchestra, and most of our section went to university, so we had two. There were only two violas left, and I was at the back of the second violins, and they said, well, hey, you got big hands, you want to learn viola? And I said, sure. So I went and got a viola, and the next week I had to figure out how to read the planets in alto clef. So at least I had an excuse.
That passage in Jupiter at the beginning, yeah, not fun on viola.
That's fine on viola. I just like, I don't know what these. Nobody can read alto clef, so they don't know if you're wrong or not, right? It's like a secret code. I've always loved the pipe organ, and I've always loved singing in choirs, so it made sense to be a church musician. I played my first church service when I was about 15, maybe, and I've been playing since. And I studied organ, viola, and composition at Wilfrid Laurier, and I couldn't quite figure out what instrument I wanted to do, so I just thought I'd do a whole bunch of them.
And how would you describe the mix of things that you do now? I mean, barring COVID, let's say.
Yeah, I teach strings, mainly violin and viola, but I've got, well, up until COVID, I had three cello students and one double. I still have one double bass student as well. Um, and I haven't. I've had some piano students over the years, but I sort of learned it in a very circuitous way, and I have not. There's enough other stuff to go with that. I'm my church job. I'm organist and choir director at Holy Savior, not Lutheran, or my Holy Savior Anglican in Waterloo. I was in a Lutheran church for 15 years before that, so old habits die hard. And I've got a great choral program there, which is obviously on hold like everywhere else. Um, I've got money for choral scholars, and I'm just really, really thrilled with the music program. Um, One of my predecessors is Barry Cabina, or what is, and who was also one of my organ teachers, and was very helpful with lots of composing stuff during university and after as well.
Fantastic. And of course, you also have this composition style and side of you, and you also sing regularly when it's not COVID, right?
Yeah, I sing with the Laura Festival Singers and also Canadian Chamber Choir. And I just got a note tonight of a sort of updated schedule for our Laura Festival, which will unfortunately be all online in the summer, but at least we've got something going on.
Yes, that's progress compared to last summer where most things were just
Yeah,
canceled.
just went,
Yeah. So virtual this summer, hopefully in person next summer. That's
yeah.
victory. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, let's hear something that you've written before we get too far into your speaking. I think first we're going to start with a piece that was commissioned, a 5 minute, 5 movement work. Do you want to describe this from a distant star? I think we're starting with the third movement.
Yes, I can't remember which one the third one is. Is that
Moon is
the
distant from
moon?
the
Yeah,
sea.
yeah. So this was a major commission by Da Capo Chamber Choir in Waterloo, which I sang with quite a few years ago. But I know probably most people in the choir, and Leonard Enns, who he likes to point out is not a relation. Um, I, I wasn't, it wasn't bad to be related to somebody like that. He, we talked about this for a long time, and Marg Jansen, who was one of the first female just wait a minute, what was she now? Justice of the Peace, I believe. Anyway, she was somebody that I knew growing up, and she passed away. She was a great supporter of the choir, and she passed away, I think it was 3 years ago now. And a bunch of her friends wanted to commission something in her memory. So all five of the movements are texts that she knew about, and it's got she also was a big champion of my sister, who's a fantastic mezzo soprano. So there are five pieces, and I believe three of them have mezzo solo as well, and two of them are just solo choir.
Perfect. And I know at least one of the movements we'll be hearing throughout the evening does feature your sister, so that'll be great. Let's cue that up, tech team, to listen to the third movement, Moon is Distant from the Sea. Beautiful. So that was your sister singing the solo part, correct?
Yes, yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and
And
the timing was perfect for that concert. That was, and I'm so thankful that they recorded everything because that was the week before lockdown.
oh wow, so very very good timing. Yes.
Yeah,
Before we get away from this piece, I wanted to also play another movement that's quite contrasting. You had mentioned this is the fifth movement, which is very joyful. Do you want to just give us a couple words about this one?
yeah. This is the texts were supposed to be all sort of different parts of Marg's life. So the moon is distant from the sea is very much the this. I'm not sure exactly what you can figure that Jenny was the moon and then the choir was the sea, sort of the gentle rocking and the of the waves and everything else, and clouds parting. I don't know. That's not what I set out to do, but sure, that seemed like a good. It's kind of like English interpretation. Well, this is what they meant to say. It's like sure, let's go with that.
100 years from now, that's what they'll say you intended to
Yeah,
do.
exactly. Yeah, and I won't be there to say otherwise. The Jubilate Deo is just "Oh, be joyful," and this was supposed to rather than it was supposed to just celebrate her life, and it goes by in a flash compared to the other ones.
Perfect. So let's hear that now. This is the fifth movement of From a Distant Star. I can just imagine some of our sopranos were trying to sing along with that by the end. I can just imagine them. They know who they are too, the ones who would be singing. Um, so, we've discussed already, I'm sure people are getting a great idea of how many hats you wear, from teacher to singer, composer, church musician, and dad. I wanted to know how these different roles and identities influence your day to day, and how they allow you to keep progressing and moving forward, how they influence one another.
Uh,
Very
some
simple question.
yeah,
Very
yeah.
simple.
Some days I don't feel like I'm moving forward at all, but I think in the last 10 months, a lot of us feel like we're just kind of stuck in quicksand. Um, so I did think about this answer, but I didn't come up with much. Um, I think the church being a church musician definitely influences my composition a lot. I would say the vast majority of what I've written is sacred because I've been a church musician for however since I was 15. However, I can't do the math, but I'm older now, and I don't know. There's always a song in my head, and whether it's a good one or not, there's all the ones that got away. Sometimes my kids help, and sometimes they don't help at all. Um, when they were much younger, and I was my wife's a school teacher, so it made sense for me to stay home and look after kids and kind of fit my teaching and church on top of things. And um, I did a lot of stuff. Composition has definitely grown in the last 25 years or so, pretty much that I have been writing music. It's crazy to say that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about your composition style very soon. But I think we should hear another piece. The next
I
one
don't
that
think I answered your question, but sure, let's hear another.
I don't think you did either, but I think that's okay. I don't think I would be able to answer that question. Um, but I would like to hear. We had talked about Da Pacem. Do you want to explain a little bit about this piece? And I'm sure quite a few of our choir members would at least know what Da Pacem means. So, what's your
Yeah. This was written my very first tour at the Canadian Chamber Choir. Went to Nova Scotia, and um, we sang the women would do a piece and the men would do a piece, and the women sang Ubi Caritas by Eleanor Daly, and I just loved the women's sound. I mean, it was the first time that I'd been on tour for quite a. I think my daughter was 3 maybe, so that was the first time that I'd been away from them, and it was kind of overwhelming on so many levels. I was just overjoyed to be able to sing music with such a great choir and tour all over Nova Scotia, and we ended up our final concert was in Glace Bay, and so the morning that we were all going to fly home, I was sitting overlooking the harbor and thinking about the women's sound and this Da Pacem kind of. It was also I remember a women's choir singing one by Hakan Olsen when I was in university, and that I I hadn't heard the piece since then, but it's always sort of stuck in my brain. It is a fantastic piece, and so on the plane ride home, I was home in time to go pick up my kids from school and bring them home, and then I sat down that night and wrote pretty much all of Da Pacem, I think. So sometimes it's quick and sometimes it's really long and takes forever. But that one was very fast and came together in a hurry and was. I mean, I'd been thinking about it sort of for the tour, and so that's specifically the women of the Canadian Chamber Choir that I was thinking about for that piece.
I think sometimes plane rides, while we miss them right now, they're such a great moment to give ourselves space because you are disconnected from everyone else. So it's interesting that you can formulate thoughts. Airports too, as much as they're busy.
I do remember going through the airport in Sydney and the metal detector went off and I was like, oh no, what do I have now? And I emptied out my pockets and I had three dinky cars in my pocket and some hair elastics. And the guy just started laughing. He goes, yeah, I know what you do for your other occupation. So
You're lucky. In Nova Scotia, they'd probably be a little kinder to you, especially up in Glace Bay in Sydney.
yeah, flying out of Halifax was one of the worst times, but Glace Bay was good.
Yeah, I've had that experience many times being from Halifax myself. So let's hear Da Pacem now, and then we'll come back and talk. Beautiful. You just want to sit in that silence. You can almost imagine what that feels like in the concert hall. Don't we miss that?
Yes. Then that was Morna Edmondson and Electra, and I really owe her a huge debt of gratitude. She took that on a whole bunch of ACDA workshops all through California. So there was, I think, every women's choir in Fresno sang that piece, and a bunch of other places. And I was like, why? I got a couple emails from people in California and Oregon and Washington State because she'd taken it all sort of down the coast, and I was very, very happy for that.
That's fantastic. And I love how much they looked up choir. Did you notice that at the end? How much they're looking up? I had to sneak that in there. So you were talking about how composition for you, it's now been part of your life for 25 years or whatever the exact math is. Um, and I wanted to know a little bit about how you started to feel that you were a composer. Like, was that inherent? Is that something that you always felt was part of your musical vocabulary? Or were there moments or a moment where you thought, I'm a composer or I want to compose?
I wanted to compose at an early age, and I remember listening to like studying violin and listening to Vivaldi and being really ticked off that he had like a 300-year head start on me, so it wasn't fair because I might have come up with that. Probably not, but um, and there were always like little bits of. There was always a song in my head. It was usually somebody else's, but sometimes it was my own as well, and I could never quite figure out how to get it out. In high school, I loved fugues. Even though I was horrible at math, but I loved fugues. And so, of course, grade 11, I tried to write a five-part fugue in B major, and it's like, I think I got to three entries and it just fell apart.
I'm pretty sure when we were talking previously, you mentioned something about fugues, and your wife in the background said, "Why are you talking about fugues?" At the same time as I said, "Why are we talking about
Yeah.
fugues?" So I think it's interesting that you like fugues so much. And I gather that you did continue trying to compose fugues, and eventually they became part of your composition process.
Yeah, I still wouldn't say I'm good at composing fugues, but I still love them. Um, so I took in university, I was trying to fit composition in, but it wasn't until third year that it sort of worked. And I ended up taking improvisation for organists with Jan Overdoen at the same time as I was taking composition. And so the improvising just kind of unlocked all this stuff, and then that I could use in composition. And composition made me think of what I could do in improvisation. So it was like this perfect storm of things happening. And I started doing as much, all of these, some of them very basic improvisation exercises, um, and just seeing them all the way through, and came up with some actual pieces that were not bad based on stuff that I'd been working on. And I was trying to do it in church and making that part of the service as well. And I think I was always worried that at student composers concerts could get very long. And some people, if you don't, the only person who can really make a whole string quartet out of four notes is somebody like Haydn, who's really good at it. So when you're, third year composition student and you're doing a 14-minute piece on like aleatoric 12 tone piano bashing, it's like, so most of my stuff ended up being short. And I also, um, I still have very vivid dreams, and they're always very interesting. Not always very interesting, but usually, at least to me. And so I'd always come up with a story. We had to have a piece every 2 weeks or so. And I'd come up with some dream, usually something inspired by a dream. So people look forward to my pieces, not because they were any good, but because I had a good story to go with it. And then slowly they got better. So I think most of the stuff from university has been recycled.
I do think creativity and that idea of dreaming, I mean, it goes hand in hand. And I will say that in my own university years, in our piano master class, our professor one time got up and said, "This class, you're going to guess if this piece exists or if I'm making it up on the spot," and proceeded to do for about an hour with different increments of stopping and saying, "Was that real or not?" So I totally understand the concept. Anyway, back to Halifax, because the next piece, which I know is one of Marg and my own personal favorites, O Magnum Mysterium, the choir that's singing here is from Halifax. Can you set up both this piece and how it got out there?
This was one of my very first commissions. in 1997, and this was sort of the brainchild of a bunch of people. There was I grew up in the Mennonite church, and typically on well, Mennonite churches don't have midnight mass because they don't have mass. But there was a lot of Mennonites have great singers, but not much liturgy. So I always thought that was kind of weird, and talked to a bunch of people, and they wanted to have a choir that was of a great caliber and commission sort of a missa brevis for Christmas Eve. And so this was the anthem that was commissioned as well. And it's written in memory of two people that were very supportive of me as a musician at growing up at church, and they had died within about 6 months of each other. They were the cutest little old couple that you'd ever see. And this was the O Magnum Mysterium. I was thinking very much somewhere between Morton Lauritsen and Victoria, and I wrote it in one. This was another one that happened in a hurry, and I wrote it in one sitting. I think I actually wrote it on the fifth. I think I wrote it on August 15th, which is the Annunciation. So I'm growing up in the Mennonite church. I'm not exactly liturgical minded, but I was very much. I'm an Anglo-Catholic Mennonite.
Our choir, of course, has sung the Victoria and the Lauritsen as well, so I'm sure that they are going to enjoy this. Let's listen to O Magnum Mysterium. I believe it's the Halifax Camerata Singers. Is it?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sure many great memories from some of our choir members there. I see some reactions, hearts and thumbs up and clapping. Fantastic. So you've spoken a little bit about your composition process for a couple of these pieces, and so far the ones that we've seen and heard have been a bit like a lightning bolt, it seems. But is that always what your composition process is like? Can you talk to us a little
No.
bit about? Yeah,
The first two that from the what is that song cycle?
from a distant
From a Distant
star.
Star. The first two, there were of the five. I actually wrote the first one in the cycle last, and some of them went quickly, and some of them not so quickly. Um, I sort of dove into a couple of those in a hurry, and then the other ones took a long time. The very first one is probably the longest of the group, and I started writing it before I started writing the other ones, and I finished it last. So I wrote four other I wrote the rest of it in between starting that one and ending it.
And we're going to hear that at the end of the show, just so people aren't too worried that they're missing out. We will hear that first piece last, the same way as you composed. Yeah.
When it used to take me a long, long time, and people say, "Oh, do you just wait for inspiration?" It's like, well, if I waited for inspiration, I would never write anything, or maybe I'd have three pieces done. So over the years, I've sort of been able to kind of get myself in the in the mood, or and if I'm not, then I get a lot of laundry done and baking, go for a walk, and then come back and try some more. And sometimes it really flows, and other times it doesn't. And um, I'd say like 95% of what I write is choral music. And so in order to write that, I really need a text first. And I sort of mull over the text. Sometimes there's music there right away, and other times it sort of changes, and other times there's not much there at all. Um,
And would you say that during that process, or at the end of that process, that there have been a lot of modifications to the way that you've written things? Or like when you listen back to something, are you still thinking about any progression? Or are you generally, when you've written something, you keep it that way?
Usually by the time I've actually got it written down, I write the majority of stuff at the piano. And my mother always said that's cheating. And I said, well, fine, then you do it. And she's like, fine, you win. Um, and it's almost like my fingers know my fingers are in touch with my brain without me knowing, and so I sort of I can feel these chords and where things should go, but sometimes it's a matter of testing it out and finding it. So I'll usually try each chunk, um, and sometimes like my subconscious is much smarter and doesn't always let like most people doesn't let my conscious know what's going on. And sometimes I wake up and think, okay, this can work together, and then sometimes it comes out just about perfectly, and it's like, "Oh, I'm so smart." I mean that's rare when that happens, but it's really nice when it does.
I think it's a bit of the synthesis of all of those different hats probably too. That's influencing. I'm gonna answer that question for you. You know, having all these different things, the improvisation, the composition, the strings, the piano, the singing. I bet that they are all percolating in there.
Definitely, and I think different musical interests as well. So you listen to one thing and steal that little bit and steal. So I mean, often I can tell I know exactly what I was listening to when I wrote a certain section of something. Not that I stole it necessarily, but I can pick out, okay, this chord. Okay, I stole two chords from Appalachian Spring by Copeland, but then I also stuck them with a Black Sabbath song, and so nobody's gonna ever. It's to my dirty little secret there, and some plain chant.
That's awesome. I love that. So let's hear another thing that you've written. This is from the Gordon College Choir, and it's Litany. Do you want to describe this piece a little bit for us?
Yeah, this is a Good Friday text. Well, I'm sure you know the drop, drop, slow tears text. Um, I, I usually, I almost always write down the dates when I finish a piece and sort of who it's for. And I don't remember exactly. I think I wrote this in 1999, and it was a particularly not good time. But I don't remember exactly what was going on. But that text sort of spoke to me, and it was very. I'm not quite I don't see colors the same in keys like somebody like Messiaen, but I can definitely get a feel for things. And it's an F sharp minor, which is a very brittle key for me. Um, and it
Very
seems
painful.
about, yeah,
Painful for a lot of composers, I think Scriabin as well, really, F sharp minor was,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it felt like this was about the best key that for a Good Friday text like that. Pain. It's also burnt orange is the color that I get from F sharp minor.
Very interesting. Okay, well, let's see if anyone else sees burnt orange with litany. Just gorgeous. That's beautiful. I wanted to read something that I read about you in my preamble looking for things. This is from an
Uh-oh.
interview, and it's yeah. He says, "Uh oh." This is from an interview, and you're talking about how it's difficult when people ask you things like, "What is your compositional style?" Which, of course, I'm about to ask you. But I really loved what you said here, so I'm going to read it. It says, "This is how I describe my music. It would be if Vaughan Williams and Duraflay went to a Rush concert. Sort of. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that covers a lot of influences. Or if Vaughan Williams, Duraflay, and the guys from Rush went to a high Anglican church service and sang Appalachian tunes." I just think that that's so great. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to maybe add a little bit to that. But in reading that, I just thought that shows that you have such a cross section of different influences. And if you could give us a couple words that would kind of self-describe what you would call your compositional style, what would they be, or would you say, I really can't?
Um, I know exactly what I go to, and I think and I sometimes it feels like I'm stuck in a rut, but there aren't that many notes to choose from, right? So I use the same 12, and I just put them in different places in different orders, just like everybody else does. Um, I sidetracked myself here. I
Well,
think
with your choral style, would you say that when most people describe your music, is there kind of an era that they associate you with, or a style that they might try to kind of push you into, and do you feel like you fit into that?
I think when I started composing, I know my one uncle would, you know, compare me to Healy Willen because I had some similar modal harmonies, but and I took that as a big compliment. Um, and I think I certainly have, I would say, a bit more Vaughan Williams, Herbert Howells, Duraflay tonality in that, but I've also got, I like mixed meter a lot, and I think it's from listening to lots of progressive rock, and also the fact that I'm not a very good dancer. So if I, make, if you make it weird rhythms, then nobody can dance properly to it. So then it looks like how I would normally dance anyways.
I mean, I can see how the influence of Rush then comes in. I mean, brilliant rock band. So many changing meters, and I mean, the drummer from that group.
When I usually use Rush because some of the other bands that I listen to are not quite as mainstream. People are like, sure, okay, yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's hear another piece. This one is called Sanctus. Can you set that up for us?
Yes, this was written for the Toronto Toronto Children's Choir, um, and this was another on tour with Canadian Chamber Choir. It was the worst blizzard I think I've ever driven through. It took us 5.5 hours to drive from Waterloo to Toronto, and I think most of the 401 was closed, and it was just okay. We're committed now, and somehow we managed to get to downtown Toronto, and um, the choir, the children's choir was there, and we had this joint concert, and the only people that showed up were the parents of the kids from the choir. Um, but but Elise Bradley's amazing, and I'd written this piece for her, and she wanted to do it, so they premiered this piece with me there and the Canadian Chamber Choir and a bunch of people who had somehow made it through this 5 feet of snow to pick up their kids, and it was really quite remarkable. So um, then I sent it. Just this is St. Mary's College in Indiana that I can't remember exactly where the it's right by Purdue University, and I just sent it to this woman. I had a disc of her women's choir, and she we sort of struck up a bit of a friendship, and she's like, "Do you mind if I record this?" Like, no. So this is from their disc.
Perfect. Let's hear that now. Sanctus.
Sanctus, 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 Dominus Deus Sabaoth, Benedictum Celi et terra, Benedictum Celi et terra, Benedictum Celi et terra, Benedictum Celi et terra.
I'm going to just ask one more question and we'll listen to one more piece before we open it up to the floor. So, everyone who has a question, get ready to raise your hand. The fastest one wins. Um, so, before we listen to I Carry Your Heart, I wanted to ask you if you had some significant influences or mentors who you wanted to mention, who've influenced you in your life, whether that's musically or otherwise.
Try that again. Oh boy, yes. um, uh, I don't know if you know the name Douglas Haas. He was at he just passed away on Christmas or on Boxing Day this past year, and he actually gave me my first commission when I was 22 or 23 or something, and has given me many. He ran a fantastic program at St. Andrew's Presbyterian in Kitchener. They've had a TV ministry for years and years, and just always willing to give support youth in that. So I mean, he was a huge influence. Um, the, I think in at Laurier, sort of bringing that all together. The composition department was very much about instrumental and orchestral, and that was the ultimate. And I remember one prof saying, choral music, like, where are you going to do that? It's like, I don't know, maybe the millions of choirs that are all around the world. And um, so I was sort of like, oh, well, you're the conservative composer. And you said, is this real or imagined? I remember one time, I made up a piece because I was really annoyed, and I called it The Beast Within, and I just held down the sustain pedal on the piano and made all these animal noises in the piano, and they're like, whoa, that was so cool. And I was like, no, that was stupid. But anyways, I digress. Um, but taking improvisation with Jan Overdoen at the same time as I was doing composing, that made it was very much um, sort of unlocked the wall there and helped me to get stuff out. And then I also took organ lessons with Barry Cabina for a year when Jan was on sabbatical, and our organ lessons ended up being Barry was the person that I wanted to do composition with in the first place, because he got it. He has written a million pieces and lots of fantastic church music. Excuse me. So that's, I mean, we were speaking the same language um, on many different levels. And I wanted to go back to a previous question that you asked me, how would I define my music? I forgot that I didn't actually answer that question either. Um, I like to. I think part of it is being a string player. I like open fifths a lot. It's also the power chords, and you're never allowed to do parallel fifths in theory. So I finally managed to pass theory, and then it's like, pff, if Vaughan Williams can do parallel fourths and that kind of thing, I love this. I mean, I love the sound of it. So I'm not doing it just because I don't know how to that I don't know they're there. I put them there on purpose. And I love stacking chords on top of each, stacking fifths and stacking various intervals and having big um, eight part eight part chords and then sort of compressing them down to solo lines. Um, I love I love Gregorian chant or just the chant influence in that. Um, like I
I
said,
wonder I wonder if part of that range of chords that you're able to hear is also from the fact that you've played string instruments from the bass all the way up to violin. I wouldn't say that that's very typical, and to be able to actually hear all of those sounds in their entirety, I think it's quite special.
well, and part of it is, you know, going from the second soprano section to the second bass section within, about a year. And puberty does weird things to you, and so I liked all those ranges, but I certainly like bass, um, and I like the like sort of what are they? I guess minor chords, and so stacking those on top, and I'll write stuff and say, oh, I love that chord. It's like that's the same chords I always go to, but I still put them in, mix them up, and um,
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm glad that you went back to answer that question. So
I
let's.
think I digressed while I was digressing, but anyways, carry on.
That's okay. That's okay. I want to listen to "I Carry Your Heart," which is with the Kronos Vocal Ensemble. Before we open up to questions, do you want to say anything about this piece before we listen to it?
Yes, this is an E. E. Cummings text that I absolutely adore. And I wrote this. I wrote this for a friend of mine. I always like to write pieces for somebody. A lot of things end up being in sort of memoriam, and I find that as the best way for me to deal with grief is to pour it out into some music. This was for a friend of mine who died of ALS, but I wrote it for her before she died of ALS, and Da Capo actually premiered it, and I got to sit at the back of the church with her, and I think she lived for another 6 months after that, but I just held her hand and we listened to it, and it was lovely. So it's in memory of Heather Snell.
Very special. Thanks. Let's listen to this.
Here is the deepest secret nobody knows. Here is the root of the root, and the sky of the tree called life, which grows higher than soul, can
Beautiful. Well, I think it's time that we hear from our own choir members. So I think we can unspotlight us, maybe, Bill. And that way we can see when people raise their hands to ask questions.
If you wish, then sure.
Perfect. Okay, I already see Carol has her hand raised, so I'm going to unmute you, Carol. Here you go.
I'd like to ask Jeff, what's it like to hear your own works? Do you ever hear bits that you wish you could change or didn't come out the way you expected?
I've heard lots that has not come out the way I expected, but thankfully it's usually in a good way.
That's
Um,
nice.
I still I'm still amazed at pieces that I wrote 20 years ago, that I still really like.
Nice.
So it's an amazing feeling. I don't think you ever get tired of it. It's funny. Barry Cabina just sent me an email. I haven't talked to him for ages, and it popped up in the middle of the of the Kronos choir piece, and I remember him saying that he, after all these years, it's still a thrill to hear a choir. Well, almost always a thrill. If they don't do a good job, then
Yeah.
you want to try and distance yourself to that. But luckily, I've not had. I think I've only had that happen once or twice, and it was kind of like, yeah, that was mostly what I wrote. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol, for that
Thank
question.
you.
I know Ol had written a question here. Now, I don't know where Ol is on here. Did you want to ask this question, Ol, if I unmute? Yeah, there we go.
Sure, you were talking about dreaming, and I sometimes wake up with a melody in my head. Do they come to you in dreams?
Not as often as I would like, but yes. A lot of the time, it's just some sort of crazy assortment of. A lot of it is late for church or weird things happening in church because that's a big part of my life.
That's funny. I,
So yeah, that's sort of the non-answer to answer your question.
maybe we'll circle back to it. I'm just kidding.
I
Okay,
always do.
yeah, I see Claire also has her hand raised. So Claire, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you, Jeff, for a beautiful, beautiful evening of music. I've been quite moved.
Thank
I
you.
understand you start with the lyrics first, a poem or something. But then how do you, and I don't even know how to describe this question because I have no theory at all, but how do you then proceed? Do you choose the altos and write them, or do you have a melody in your head and it is split between several voices, or do you write in chunks? How does it work?
All of those. It really it sort of changes all the time. Um, it depends on I also knowing having an idea of who I'm writing it for. So if I'm writing it for something for a children's choir, I'm obviously not going to be writing it SATB. If I'm writing it for a much smaller church choir or a quartet or something like that, sort of knowing the limits of range. I try not to go too high for sopranos ever because it's some of them like it. So I mean, if they say, well, yeah, you can do that. So at the end of that song, too, there was a high B flat that I think they were scared of because I could just hear it kind of like off in the distance there. They must have like put her at the back of the chapel or something like that, and then okay, and go. But yeah, I find honestly, I would say that there's music hiding in the text, and it's sort of up to me to find it. And like Hear Your Heart, that's the only text that I've ever, or one of about three texts that I've ever set more than once. And the other one is for women's voices, and it's very different. So if I can sort of get that out of my mind and let it go, and again, it's sort of this weird relationship at the piano with my hands and my brain. Like it almost feels like my subconscious is dictating what's happening, and I can find where I want them to go, but if I just would try and sit down and write it, I can't. Sometimes I can get it to work, but not always. So again, I don't know if that really answered much, but
It's a magical power, I guess.
that I don't understand.
Yeah, that's good. I see Brad has his hand up. Brad, I'm going to unmute you here.
You have played all the string instruments and you teach all the string instruments from bass right through viola and violin. Do you write string quartets as well?
I've written two, and one has been performed once and never again. I've written a number of I've written some stuff for my students. Um, I've written a choral piece with string orchestra, a Gloria with string orchestra accompaniment. So it was nice to be encouraged to do that. Um, it was nice to put my sort of two chunks of my life together.
Perfect. I also saw in the chat we had a self-identified alto one. Right. Tell us the names of those rock bands. When we were talking about Rush, and you said I mostly use Rush because people might not know the other groups. Who are those other groups?
Uh, Older Dream Theater. I always loved that. Um, King's X is probably one of my very favorite bands. They're just a trio that sings all in harmony, and they're just phenomenal people. A lot of interesting um, instrumental bands as well. It sort of depends on the day.
Fair enough. And yes, Bob, I see Bob had that
And
question.
of course, yes, and all the progressive rock from the 70s, but then way more obscure stuff as well. And the heavier the better, but also the weirder the better. And but again, depends on the day. Cheap Trick today.
Are there any other questions before we listen to one last piece? Oh, Carol has another question.
Well, actually, what I have is a comment, and I agree with Claire. The music was absolutely gorgeous, and I love your thick chords with all of the notes in them and stuff moving all around. It to me, I have two sons who are jazz musicians, professional jazz musicians, and I've heard a lot of jazz, and I can hear beautifully choreographed jazz in your church music, and it's absolutely stunning. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
I do love jazz, but I don't understand jazz, so I try to pretend that you know,
Well, guess
again,
what?
that I like to steal little bits from everywhere. That's
You've been successful.
thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, any last questions before we hear the first movement of the piece that Jeff keeps forgetting the title for? No more questions. Okay, so this is the first movement, and it does feature, again, Jeff's sister. And this movement, what is the title of this movement, Jeff? Do you know?
Yeah.
Well, I will just say that this one is slightly longer than what we've listened to so far as well. So just so that our choir members know, it's
I,
it's about 8 minutes, I think. Is that right, Jeff?
where is the text? I can't. Um,
Well, we'll see the title on the YouTube video.
oh, sorry. Yes, it's "The Light of Stars" by Longfellow.
Okay, perfect. So
And this 2019 was a tough year. I wrote this. I finished this piece almost a month to the day before my best friend was killed in a motorcycle accident. I didn't know how much this text was gonna just shatter me after that. So this is the end. To know how sublime a thing it is to suffer and be strong. Those words just got me through. Well, just sort of wrecked me. But it was it's got this hope. I'll stop talking now. It's got Mars in it too, which is kind of cool.
I think that's all beautiful. So let's listen to this last piece before we come back. Gorgeous.
Well, thanks for listening to all that one. That was long, but it had the fugue bit in it there.
We had to bring back the fugue by the end, keep returning to these circular things.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today. I think this was very insightful and meaningful, and the pieces, I mean, they're gorgeous, and I know our choir loves singing your music, so I'm sure this has opened new requests that will be coming to Marg for future seasons. And I'll bring Marg back in to just say a couple more words.
Yeah, I agree with Jenna, of course. We're going to be looking at your music next time we're together. It's just so nice to hear choral music, isn't it? And I know I could listen to your recordings, but it's so valuable to have you here with us. Thank you. I also want to thank Jenna for slowly drawing out answers in various
And keeping
ways,
me on track.
keeping you on track
or
and
sort
back
of.
and forth, sort of, absolutely.
It's a collaborative pianist trait, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So thank you to you, Jenna, for all the background work that you did, and how you gently coax information out of people in such a wonderful way. So, and
Because
thanks
she's not
for,
here, so she can't smack me. So
well, so thanks to any visitors also. Just so you know, we've been meeting Tuesday nights. We have quite a full season. We're actually going to have a Q&A with Laura Hawley, a colleague of yours, Jeff.
yes.
March the 30th. So you'll see publicity about that. So we're looking forward to hearing from Laura. And I think if you'd like to stick around, Jeff, I think you can stick around to be in the breakout rooms if you want to chat
Sure.
with us. So Harry?
Yes, I would like to add some thanks too. Thank you, Jeff and Jenna, for prying all that information out of Jeff. We also want to thank our sponsors who are supporting us this season, Prospectus Associates, a public affairs firm here in town, and Habitat for Humanity. Their Ottawa chapter is also supporting us this season. And of course, we want to thank all our guests who came tonight. And if you like the programming that we did and like to see more, please go to our website, and you can make a donation there through Canada Helps, and that will help us keep programming like this coming. So with that said, we would invite our guests to leave now because we just have some internal announcements that we have to talk to the choir about. So we'll give you a second to say your goodbyes, and we hope that we will see you again.
Bye.
Bye.